My father was mid-toast, calling my sister the only daughter who made something of herself, when her phone rang. She answered on speaker, and suddenly FBI Director Harrison's voice filled the room. "Agent Torres, I need you to patch me through to your sister immediately. She outranks everyone in this building." The wine glass slipped from my father's hand as 20 years of calling me his biggest mistake shattered along with it. I hadn't been home to Denver in 3 years. Not since the last family gathering where my father had looked me dead in the eye and said I was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The daughter who broke his heart. But when my sister Maria announced her promotion to senior FBI agent, my mother made it clear. Attendance wasn't optional. The house was decorated like a shrine to success. Maria's commendations lined the mantle, her FBI Academy graduation photo centered above the fireplace. I wore simple jeans and a black sweater, no hint of the uniform that hung in my classified locker 3 time zones away. They'd started the toasts early. Uncle Carlos raised his glass to Maria, the Torres daughter who actually made something of herself. Aunt Rosa nodded approvingly, adding that she'd always known Maria would be the one to, quote, save the family name. I sat at the kitchen table, picking at my enchilada while they passed around Maria's newest accommodation letter like it was the Declaration of Independence. My father stood by the window, beer in hand, occasionally glancing at me with that familiar look of disappointment. "What about you, Carmen?" my cousin Luis asked with false interest. "Still, figuring things out?" The laughter was polite but cutting. Still figuring things out. That's what they'd called my life for the past decade. Ever since I'd enlisted, instead of going to college like Maria. Ever since I'd chosen violence over education, as my father put it. My mother wouldn't even make eye contact, the family embarrassment. The daughter who'd thrown away her potential to play soldier in foreign countries they couldn't pronounce. Maria was holding court by the living room, describing her latest case involving interstate fraud. She wore her success like armor, confident and radiant. Everyone hung on her every word about federal investigations and courtroom victories. "Carmen never tells us anything about what she does," my father said, his voice carrying across the room. "Probably because there's nothing worth telling." The comment hung in the air like smoke. A few people chuckled uncomfortably. I kept eating, letting the familiar sting wash over me. 28 years old, and I was still the family disappointment who'd never amount to anything. That's when Maria's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, her face immediately shifting to professional attention. "Sorry, I have to take this. It's Director Harrison." She answered on speaker, probably wanting to show off her important connections. "Agent Torres speaking." "Maria, thank God you picked up." Director Harrison's voice was tight with urgency. "I need you to patch me through to your sister immediately. We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe, and she outranks everyone in this building. This is classified level 1 priority." The room went dead silent. My father's beer bottle slipped from his fingers, crashing against the hardwood floor. Maria's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Uncle Carlos's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake," Maria stammered. "My sister Carmen isn't." "Agent Torres," Director Harrison's voice cut through her confusion like a blade. "Your sister is Colonel Carmen Torres, Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations. She's been running classified missions for the past 8 years that most of Congress doesn't even know exist. Now please, put her on the phone. Lives are at stake." Every eye in the room turned to me. The family failure, the disappointment, the daughter who'd never amount to anything. I stood slowly, walked to Maria's trembling hand and took the phone. "Director Harrison," I said calmly. "Colonel Torres here. What's the situation?" The pattern started when I was 17. Maria had just gotten accepted to Georgetown with a full academic scholarship, and the whole family was celebrating at Abuela's house. I mentioned that I was thinking about military service instead of college. My father's face darkened like a storm cloud. "Midja, you're throwing your life away." Maria is going to be somebody important. You're choosing to be cannon fodder. Dad, I want to serve my country. Serve? He laughed bitterly. You want to play with guns because you're too lazy for real work. Maria studies 12 hours a day. You can't even keep your room clean. The comparison became a constant refrain. Maria the brilliant one, Carmen the disappointment. Maria the future lawyer. Carmen the girl who couldn't figure out her life. When I enlisted at 18, my father didn't speak to me for 6 months. At family dinners, he'd introduce Maria as my daughter, the Georgetown student, and me as Carmen, who's away. Like I was in rehab instead of basic training. The comments followed me through every military milestone. When I graduated from boot camp, my father said, "Well, at least you finished something." When I got accepted into officer candidate school, he shrugged and said, "I guess they'll take anyone these days." Maria, meanwhile, was law review, internships, everything golden. Every family gathering became a showcase for her achievements, while my military service was treated like an embarrassing phase I'd eventually outgrow. "When are you coming home to get a real job?" became my mother's favorite question, as if defending my country wasn't real work. As if the specialized training I was receiving was somehow less valuable than Maria's law books. The worst was my cousin Elena's wedding 3 years ago. Maria had just started at the FBI, and she was the star of the reception. Everyone wanted to hear about federal cases and criminal investigations. When someone asked what I did, my father answered for me. "Carmen's still playing soldier overseas. We keep hoping she'll come to her senses and do something productive with her life." I tried to explain that I was in special operations, that my work was classified, that I couldn't discuss the details, but to them, classified just meant unimportant enough that no one cares. If it was really important, my Uncle Roberto said, we'd have heard about it on the news. They measured worth by visibility, by recognition they could understand and brag about. Maria's FBI badge was something they could show off to neighbors. My classified missions might as well have been imaginary. By rate, the breaking point came during Christmas 2 years ago. Maria had just solved a high-profile white-collar crime case that made the local news. The whole family watched the broadcast, where she gave an interview outside the federal courthouse. My father beamed with pride. "Now this is what success looks like. Carmen, you should watch and learn." I'd just returned from a 3-month deployment in the Middle East, where my team had prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed hundreds. But I couldn't say that. Couldn't explain that while Maria was chasing financial criminals, I was literally saving lives in ways that would never make the evening news. Instead, I sat quietly while they praised Maria's real accomplishments and made jokes about my adventure phase. My mother pulled me aside that night. "Mia, when are you going to settle down and be like your sister? This military thing, it's not a real career for a woman. Maria has respect, stability, a future. What do you have?" What did I have? Medals I couldn't display, commendations I couldn't mention, skills that made me one of the most capable soldiers in the U.S. military. But to my family, I had nothing but stubbornness and poor life choices. They decided who I was the moment I chose the military over college. Everything after that was just confirmation of their disappointment. What my family didn't know was that I hadn't been playing soldier for the past 8 years. I'd been living a life so classified that most government officials would never know it existed. After officer candidate school, I was recruited into the 75th Ranger Regiment. Not the regular army my father imagined, but an elite special operations unit that handled missions other soldiers couldn't even dream of. But that was just the beginning. 2 years later, I was selected for Delta Force, officially known as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Less than 1% of military personnel ever get that call. Out of those selected, even fewer survive the training. I not only survived, I excelled. By 25, I was leading counterterrorism operations in places that didn't exist on public maps. Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, anywhere American interests were threatened by forces that conventional military couldn't touch. My team was the scalpel that removed problems before they became headlines. While Maria was studying case law, I was studying how to infiltrate terrorist compounds without leaving a trace. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While she was preparing for courtroom arguments, I was learning 17 different ways to neutralize threats in complete silence. While she was building a career that earned my family's praise, I was saving lives in ways they'd never understand. The irony was brutal. My father wanted a daughter who made a difference in the world. He had one. He just couldn't see it. 3 years ago, I prevented a chemical weapons attack on a U.S. embassy in North Africa. The mission was so sensitive that it was briefed directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The terrorist cell had been planning to release sarin gas during a diplomatic reception that would have killed over 300 people, including 2 senators and the ambassador's family. My team infiltrated their compound, neutralized the threat, and secured the chemical weapons before they could be deployed. The official story released to the press was that mechanical failure had caused the cancellation of the reception. No one ever knew how close they'd come to a massacre. Last year, I led a hostage rescue in Eastern Europe that saved the lives of 12 aid workers captured by a human trafficking ring. The operation required precision timing, perfect intelligence, and skills that take decades to master. We got everyone out alive. The story never made the news because officially, those aid workers were never captured. They were simply delayed by weather conditions. 6 months ago, I was promoted to colonel and named deputy commander of Joint Special Operations Command. At 28, I became one of the youngest officers ever to reach that position. I now oversee missions across 4 continents, coordinate with intelligence agencies my family has never heard of, and make decisions that affect global security. My clearance level is so high that I brief senators who don't have the authorization to hear the full details of what I do. I've sat in rooms with the Secretary of Defense, discussing threats that would keep ordinary citizens awake at night. I've shaken hands with foreign ministers and intelligence chiefs who know my reputation, even if they've never seen my face. The bitter truth was that while my family measured success by newspaper mentions and cocktail party bragging rights, I was actually doing the work that kept them safe enough to sleep soundly in their beds. Every time they called me a disappointment, I was protecting the very freedom that allowed them to dismiss me. Every time they compared me unfavorably to Maria, I was handling crises that would have ended her FBI career before it started. They thought I was the family failure. In reality, I was the shield between them and a world more dangerous than they could imagine. The call came at 03:00 hours on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Maria's promotion celebration. I was in my secure apartment in Virginia, reviewing intelligence reports, when my encrypted satellite phone buzzed with the priority signal that meant someone's life was hanging in the balance. Colonel Torres, this is General Martinez at JSOC. We have a Code Black situation developing in eastern Ukraine. Code Black. The classification reserved for imminent threats to American lives with international implications. I was instantly awake, my mind shifting into operational mode. What's the scenario, General? 12 hours ago, a team of American engineers working on a classified NATO infrastructure project were taken hostage by a Russian-backed paramilitary group called the Iron Wolves. They're demanding the release of 3 war criminals currently in NATO custody, plus $50 million in cryptocurrency. I pulled up the secure terminal, watching encrypted files populate my screen. Photos of the engineers, all civilians, including 2 women in their 20s. Intel on the Iron Wolves showed a ruthless organization with connections to state-sponsored terrorism. What's the timeline? I asked, studying satellite imagery of the compound where the hostages were being held. 72 hours before they start executing hostages. But here's the problem, Colonel. The compound is in a demilitarized zone that we can't officially enter without triggering an international incident. Any rescue operation has to be completely off the books. I felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling on my shoulders. This was why they'd promoted me to deputy commander, not just for my tactical skills, but for my ability to navigate situations where there were no good options, only necessary ones. What about local assets? I asked, analyzing the terrain data. Compromised. Our intelligence network in that region was blown 3 weeks ago. We suspect the Iron Wolves have been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to grab high-value American targets. The satellite images showed a fortified compound surrounded by open terrain. 3 buildings, multiple guard positions, and according to thermal imaging, at least 20 armed militants. The hostages were being held in the central building, probably the basement level. General, who else knows about this? At this level? You, me, and the Joint Chiefs. The president has been briefed, but he's made it clear. If this goes wrong, we never had this conversation. I understood. This was a mission that couldn't exist. Success would save 12 American lives but could never be acknowledged. Failure would not only cost those lives but could destroy my career and potentially spark an international crisis. What about extraction? How do we get the hostages out even if we can reach them? That's the other problem. The nearest friendly territory is 40 kilometers through hostile terrain. No air support, no backup. No official rescue if the team gets compromised. I stared at the intelligence reports, calculating odds that would have terrified most career officers. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a diplomatic powder keg wrapped in a suicide mission. The kind of operation that ended careers even when it succeeded. Colonel, I need to know if you're willing to take this on. I won't sugarcoat it. This is the most dangerous assignment we've run in the past 5 years. If you say yes, you'll be leading a team into a situation where everything that can go wrong probably will. I thought about those 12 Americans, probably terrified, definitely aware that time was running out. I thought about their families, waiting for news that might never come. And I thought about why I'd chosen this life in the first place. General, send me the full mission briefing. I'll have an operational plan ready in 6 hours. Within 18 hours, I had assembled a team of 5 operators from different branches of Special Forces. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from Delta, Lieutenant Commander Walsh from SEAL Team 6, Captain Kim from Army Rangers, and 2 intelligence specialists who officially didn't exist on any roster. We met at a black site facility outside Ramstein Air Base in Germany. No names, no official paperwork, no digital footprint. If this mission went sideways, we'd become ghosts that no government would acknowledge. I spread the satellite imagery across the briefing table, marking entry points and escape routes with red ink. Here's what we know. 12 American hostages in the basement of this central building. 20+ militants with military-grade weapons. Guard rotations every 4 hours. 1 vehicle checkpoint at the main entrance. Rodriguez studied the thermal scans. What about surveillance systems? Extensive. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and tripwires along the perimeter. But here's our advantage. They're expecting a frontal assault or negotiation. They're not expecting infiltration through the old Soviet drainage tunnels that run beneath the compound. I pulled up underground schematics that our intelligence teams had acquired from Cold War archives. These tunnels were built in 1987 and abandoned after the Soviet collapse. They connect to the compound's basement level through a maintenance access that should be unguarded. Captain Kim traced the tunnel route with her finger. That's a 2-kilometer crawl through drainage pipes that might be flooded or collapsed. It's also our only chance to reach the hostages without triggering a firefight that gets them killed, I replied. Once we're inside, we have a 15-minute window to neutralize the guards, secure the hostages, and reach the extraction point before reinforcements arrive. The plan was surgical precision, wrapped in calculated chaos. While Rodriguez and Walsh created a distraction at the main checkpoint, making the militants think a rescue attempt was coming from the obvious direction, Kim and I would use the tunnels to reach the hostages. The intelligence specialists would jam communications and provide overwatch from a concealed position 1 kilometer away. We inserted at 0200 hours under a moonless sky, parachuting from an aircraft that officially never crossed into that airspace. The landing zone was a frozen field that felt like concrete beneath our boots. Temperature was -15 Celsius, cold enough to turn breath into instant fog and make metal equipment painful to touch. The tunnel entrance was exactly where the schematics indicated, hidden beneath a collapsed concrete slab that looked like wartime debris. Kim and I descended into a drainage system that smelled like decades of stagnant water and rust. The tunnels were narrow enough that we had to crawl single file, dragging our equipment through ankle-deep water that had frozen into slush. 2 hours of crawling through Soviet-era infrastructure brought us to the access point beneath the compound. I could hear footsteps above us. Guards making their rounds, completely unaware that their basement was about to be breached. At exactly 0415 hours, Rodriguez and Walsh triggered their distraction. Flashbangs and small arms fire erupted at the main checkpoint, drawing every guard in the compound toward the perceived threat. That's when Kim and I moved. The basement access opened into a storage room filled with ammunition crates and communications equipment. Through the walls, I could hear the hostages, 12 American voices, scared but alive. 3 guards remained in the basement level, focused on the sounds of combat coming from outside. I used hand signals to coordinate with Kim. Silent takedown, no gunfire, no alarms. We moved like shadows, neutralizing the guards with precision that came from years of training for exactly this scenario. When I opened the cell door, 12 terrified faces looked up at me with hope they'd probably given up on ever feeling again. "We're getting you out of here," I whispered to the hostages. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. The gunfire outside had stopped too quickly. Rodriguez should have been able to maintain the distraction for at least 20 minutes. We'd only had 8. My earpiece crackled with static. Then Rodriguez's voice came through tense and urgent. "Colonel, we've got a problem. This wasn't just a hostage situation. It was a trap. They were waiting for us." Through the basement window, I could see vehicle headlights approaching the compound. Too many vehicles. The Iron Wolves hadn't just been guarding 12 hostages. They'd been using them as bait to capture an American Special Operations team. "How many?" I asked, helping the hostages to their feet. Several were injured, one woman had a badly swollen ankle, and an older engineer looked like he hadn't eaten in days. 40-plus militants in 6 vehicles. Military-grade equipment, night vision, the works. Someone leaked our mission parameters, Colonel. They know exactly who we are and why we're here. My blood went cold. A leak meant this wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a potential international incident that could end careers and destroy lives. If we were captured, the U.S. government would deny our existence. If we died here, our families would be told we died in training accidents. Kim appeared at my shoulder, her face grim. "Extraction route is compromised. They've got the tunnel entrance surrounded." I looked at the 12 civilians depending on us for their lives. Sarah Chen, a water systems engineer from Seattle with 2 young kids. Robert Martinez, a telecommunications specialist whose wife was 8 months pregnant. People with families, futures, reasons to live that had nothing to do with geopolitics or military operations. "Colonel," one of the intelligence specialists reported through the comm, "we're picking up radio chatter. They're not just planning to capture us. They want to broadcast our execution as propaganda. This is bigger than a hostage rescue. Someone wanted American Special Operations Forces delivered directly to the Iron Wolves." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random. Someone with access to classified information had set us up, knowing that a failed rescue mission would be devastating to U.S. credibility and morale. Whoever had leaked our mission hadn't just betrayed our team. They'd betrayed every principle we'd sworn to defend. "What about air support?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Negative. Official channels are dark, and any aircraft in this airspace would confirm American military involvement. We're on our own." The compound shook as explosions began rocking the main building. The Iron Wolves weren't just surrounding us. They were planning to bring the entire structure down with us inside it. Smoke began filtering through the basement vents, and I could hear the militants shouting orders in Russian and local dialects. One of the hostages, a young woman named Lisa, grabbed my arm. "Are we going to die here?" I looked into her eyes, seeing the same fear I'd seen in too many faces over the years. But I also saw trust, the kind of absolute faith that civilians place in soldiers, believing that somehow we'll find a way to bring them home safely. "Not on my watch," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. But as the explosions grew louder and the smoke thicker, I realized that keeping that promise was going to require more than just military training. It was going to require a miracle. The ceiling began collapsing in sections, concrete and steel raining down, as the Iron Wolves systematically destroyed the compound with us inside. We had minutes before the entire basement level became our tomb. Bouville, I made a decision that violated every protocol I'd ever learned. Rodriguez, Walsh, fall back to the secondary extraction point. That's an order. Colonel, we're not leaving you. You are if you want these people to live. I cut the comm channel and turned to Kim. I need you to get the hostages to the old ventilation shaft on the north wall. It connects to an abandoned mine shaft about 50 meters from here. Kim's eyes widened. That shaft hasn't been used since the 1960s. It could collapse or lead nowhere, or it's the only route they haven't anticipated. I pulled out my sidearm and checked the magazine. I'm going topside to buy you time. Carmen, that's suicide. There are 40 militants up there. I looked at the 12 terrified faces depending on us. Sarah Chen was cradling her injured ankle, tears streaming down her face. Robert Martinez was helping an older colleague who could barely stand. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now their only chance of seeing their families again was if I made the impossible choice. Get 'em out, Kim. That's all that matters. Before she could argue, I grabbed 2 flashbang grenades and headed for the stairwell. Behind me, I could hear her organizing the hostages, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos around us. The main floor was a war zone. Smoke filled the air, debris covered everything, and through the broken windows I could see muzzle flashes from the militants' positions. They'd set up a perimeter expecting us to try escaping through conventional routes. They weren't expecting a single operator to come straight at them. I kicked open the front door and threw both flashbangs simultaneously, the explosions lighting up the night like artificial lightning. In the seconds of confusion that followed, I moved. Years of training took over. Muscle memory guided my movements as I engaged targets with precision fire, using their own vehicles for cover, while drawing their attention away from the basement, where Kim was evacuating the hostages. A bullet caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around and sending fire through my entire left side. Another grazed my leg, making each step a conscious act of will. But I kept moving, kept firing, kept drawing every Iron Wolf militant toward my position, instead of the ventilation shaft where 12 American lives were crawling toward freedom. My earpiece crackled. Kim's voice, distant but clear. Package secured, all 12 souls accounted for, moving to extraction. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by the realization that I'd accomplished my mission. The hostages were safe. But I was surrounded, wounded, and running out of ammunition in a compound that was systematically being destroyed around me. A voice called out in accented English. American, you have fought well, but it is over. Surrender now and you will live to see trial. I pressed my back against an overturned vehicle, feeling blood seeping through my tactical vest. 3 rounds left in my sidearm. No backup coming. No official extraction planned for someone who was never officially here. This was the moment every special operations soldier knows might come, when the mission succeeds, but the operator doesn't make it home. That's when I heard it. The distinct sound of Apache helicopters cutting through the night sky. The cavalry wasn't supposed to come. This mission was off the books, deniable, designed to disappear without a trace. But someone had sent official U.S. military assets into hostile territory to extract one operator who wasn't supposed to exist. The first Hellfire missile lit up the night, taking out the Iron Wolves' command vehicle in a ball of orange flame. The militants scattered, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos as 2 Apache gunships circled the compound like mechanical vultures. My earpiece crackled with a voice I recognized. General Martinez himself. Colonel Torres, this is Overwatch. Air support is inbound. Stay down and mark your position. I popped a green smoke grenade, marking my location as the Apaches systematically dismantled the Iron Wolves' positions. Within minutes, the militants who'd had me surrounded were either dead or fleeing into the forest. A Black Hawk landed in the compound's courtyard, rotors whipping debris through the air. Medics rushed toward me as I stumbled from cover, my left arm hanging useless at my side. Colonel, what's your status? The team medic asked, examining my wounds. All packages secured and extracted, I reported through gritted teeth. Mission accomplished. 12 hours later, I was in a military hospital in Germany. my shoulder in a sling and my leg wrapped in bandages. General Martinez sat beside my bed, his expression mixing relief with something that looked almost like awe. "Carmen, what you did back there, sending your team to safety while you held off 40 militants single-handedly, that's going to become legend in special operations circles. The hostages, all safe. Every one of them is on their way home to their families. Sarah Chen asked me to give you this." He handed me a letter written on hospital stationery. Inside, her shaky handwriting read, "My children will grow up knowing that heroes are real because of you." But it was what General Martinez said next that changed everything. "Colonel, there's something else. The president has been briefed on your actions. He's recommending you for the Medal of Honor, and Congress is fast-tracking your promotion to Brigadier General. At 28, you'll be the youngest female general in U.S. military history." The room spun slightly, and not just from the pain medication. "Sir, the mission was classified." "Was classified. The president has declassified your service record for the ceremony. The American people are going to know what you've been doing all these years, Carmen. They're going to know that while they slept safely in their beds, you were fighting battles they never knew existed." 3 weeks later, I stood in the Rose Garden wearing my dress uniform, the Medal of Honor heavy against my chest. The president shook my hand as cameras flashed, and my service record was read aloud for the first time in my career. "Brigadier General Carmen Torres has conducted 47 classified operations across 4 continents, saving an estimated 847 American and Allied lives. Her actions represent the highest traditions of military service and personal courage." Standing in the crowd, I saw familiar faces: Rodriguez, Kim, Walsh, and the other operators who'd served beside me. But I also saw 12 civilians and their families, the people whose lives had made all the classified missions and hidden sacrifices worthwhile. That evening, my phone rang. It was Maria, her voice shaking with emotion. "Carmen, I had no idea. All these years, I thought I was the successful one. But you've been saving lives while I was just solving cases." "Maria, Dad wants to talk to you," she interrupted. "He's been crying for 3 hours." The first call came at 0600 hours, 2 days after the Medal of Honor ceremony. My father's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears and 28 years of regret. "Mija, Carmen, I don't know how do I apologize for 28 years of being wrong?" I sat in my Pentagon office, still adjusting to the reality that I now had a Pentagon office with my name on the door and Brigadier General on my nameplate. Through the window, I could see the Potomac River, peaceful and constant, while my entire world had shifted overnight. "Dad, you don't. No, let me speak, please." His voice cracked. "I watched that ceremony on television. I listened to them read your record. 47 missions. 847 lives saved. And all these years, I called you my biggest mistake." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of disappointment and words that couldn't be taken back. I'd imagined this conversation countless times, but never thought it would hurt this much when it finally happened. "When you were 17, he continued, "and you told me you wanted to serve, I should have been proud. Instead, I was afraid. Afraid that I was losing my little girl to something I didn't understand. But I wasn't losing you. You were becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Dad, your mother hasn't stopped crying since the news broke. She keeps saying, our little Carmen has been saving the world, and we never knew. We failed you, Micha. We failed you in every way that matters." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. This was what I'd wanted for so many years. Acknowledgement, understanding, pride from the man who'd raised me. But now that it was here, it felt hollow somehow. The validation I'd craved had come too late, after I'd already learned to find worth in my own achievements rather than their approval. The calls kept coming. Uncle Carlos, who'd joked about me playing soldier, now wanted to set up interviews with local news stations. Aunt Rosa, who'd always compared me unfavorably to Maria, suddenly wanted to host a family celebration in my honor. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years were posting on social media about being related to a war hero. Maria called that evening, her voice careful and measured in that way she used when discussing difficult legal cases. Carmen, I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I've ever said in court. You don't owe me. I do. I absolutely do. She took a shaky breath. All these years, I let them compare us. I let them put me on a pedestal while they tore you down, and I never once defended you. I was so caught up in being the good daughter that I forgot to be a good sister. I waited, letting her work through words that clearly weren't easy to say. The worst part is, I knew you were special. Even as kids, you were always the one who stood up to bullies, who helped the underdog, who had this incredible sense of right and wrong. I knew the military was perfect for you, but I was selfish. I liked being the favorite too much to share it. Maria, let me finish, please. When I watched that ceremony, when I heard what you've been doing all these years, Carmen, you've been everything I pretended to be. You've actually been making the world safer, while I've been chasing criminals who mostly just steal money. You're the real hero in this family, and I spent 28 years being jealous of someone I should have been proud to call my sister. The hardest conversation came when my mother called, her voice small and broken in a way I'd never heard before. Minja, how do I ask forgiveness for not believing in my own daughter? We talked for 3 hours. She told me about the nights she'd worried when I was deployed, how she'd prayed for my safety while simultaneously wishing I'd chosen a different path. She confessed that she'd always been proud of my service, but was too afraid to show it, worried that support would encourage me to take even greater risks. I thought if I kept pushing you toward a safer life, maybe you'd leave the military and come home. I never understood that the military wasn't taking you away from us. It was showing us who you really were. But it was the conversation with my father a week later that changed everything. He drove to Washington to see me in person, looking older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his shoulders bent with the weight of years of regret. We sat in a quiet restaurant near the Pentagon, and for the first time in my adult life, he looked at me with something other than disappointment. Carmen, I need to tell you something I should have said when you were 17. I was never disappointed in you. I was afraid of losing you. When Maria chose law school, I knew she'd be safe. When you chose the military, I knew I might get a folded flag instead of a daughter. He reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers rough from years of construction work. But I was wrong to let that fear make me cruel. You didn't need my protection. You were meant to protect others, and you've done that better than I ever could have imagined. Looking at him, I realized that forgiveness wasn't something I had to grant or withhold. It was something I could choose, not for him, but for myself. The anger I'd carried for so many years was heavier than any gear I'd humped through hostile territory. I forgive you, Dad, but I need you to understand something. I don't need your pride to validate what I've done. I needed it when I was young, but I don't anymore. What I need now is for you to know me as I am, not as who you wanted me to be. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm ready to learn, Mija. I'm ready to know my daughter. 6 months after the Medal of Honor ceremony, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I walked into General Martinez's office and submitted my resignation from active duty. Carmen, you're 28 years old, and you're already a general. You could be chief of staff by 40. Why would you walk away from all of this? I looked out his window at the Pentagon courtyard, watching young soldiers hurrying between buildings, carrying briefcases full of classified documents and the weight of national security on their shoulders. Once, that had been me. Now, I needed something different. General, for 10 years I've been fighting battles that no one could know about, saving lives that couldn't be acknowledged, serving a country that couldn't recognize my service. And I loved every minute of it. But now I want to fight a different kind of battle. What kind of battle? The one for the kids who get told they're not good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to serve their country. The ones whose families don't understand what military service means. The ones like I used to be. 3 weeks later, I was standing in front of a converted warehouse in Colorado Springs, watching contractors hang a sign that read, Torres Foundation for Military Youth Development. The building would house a comprehensive program for young people considering military service. Everything from physical training to leadership development to family education programs. But this wasn't going to be another typical youth program. I had something more ambitious in mind. The first component was a pre-military academy for high school students whose families didn't support their desire to serve. Kids who were being pressured to pursue safer careers, who were told that military service was a waste of their potential. The academy would provide them with the physical conditioning, academic preparation, and leadership training they'd need to excel in any branch of service they chose. The second component was what I called the Family Bridge program. I'd learned from my own experience that sometimes families opposed military service, not out of malice, but out of fear and misunderstanding. The program would educate parents and siblings about what modern military service actually entailed, helping them understand that their children weren't throwing their lives away. They were choosing to dedicate their lives to something larger than themselves. The third component was the most personal to me, the Hidden Service Project. Too many military operations remain classified long after they need to be, leaving families and communities unable to understand or appreciate what their service members have accomplished. Working with congressional liaisons and the Department of Defense, we would advocate for the declassification of historical operations so that families could finally know the truth about their veterans' service. Sarah Chen, one of the hostages I'd rescued in Eastern Europe, became my first major donor. She'd returned to her water systems engineering job, but she'd never forgotten the night a female special operations officer had risked her life to bring her home to her children. "General Torres," she said when she visited the Foundation site, "you saved my life, now let me help you save other people's futures." Robert Martinez, the telecommunications specialist whose wife had been pregnant during his captivity, joined the Foundation's board of directors. "My daughter will grow up knowing that heroes aren't just in comic books," he told me. "She'll know that sometimes heroes are the people whose stories we never get to hear." The most unexpected support came from Maria. She took a leave of absence from the FBI to serve as the Foundation's legal counsel, helping us navigate the complex regulations around military recruitment and family privacy rights. "Carmen," she said during one of our planning meetings, "I spent my whole career chasing criminals who broke the law. You spent yours protecting people who never even knew they were in danger. I want to help you show other families what real service looks like before they make the same mistakes our family made." My parents drove up from Denver for the Foundation's opening ceremony. My father, who'd spent 28 years calling military service a waste of potential, now wore a Torres Foundation volunteer shirt and helped set up folding chairs for the event. During my opening speech, I looked out at an audience of military families, community leaders, and young people considering service. In the front row sat the 12 Americans I'd rescued, along with their spouses and children, living proof that sometimes the most important missions are the ones no one ever hears about. 10 years ago, I said, my father told me I was his biggest mistake because I chose to serve my country instead of pursuing what he considered a real career. He was wrong, but he was wrong because he didn't understand what service meant. He didn't know that choosing to serve others isn't a step down from civilian success. It's a step up towards something more meaningful than personal achievement. I paused, finding my father's eyes in the audience. He was crying, but his tears weren't tears of regret anymore. They were tears of understanding. This foundation exists for every young person who's been told they're not good enough, every family that's afraid military service means losing their child, and every veteran whose true service has never been acknowledged. We're here to bridge the gap between civilian expectations and military reality, to show that service isn't sacrifice. It's the highest form of success. After the ceremony, as volunteers cleaned up and families shared stories about their military experiences, Maria found me sitting quietly on the Foundation's front steps. "You know what I've realized?" she said, settling beside me. "What's that?" "You were never the family disappointment. You were the family inspiration. We just didn't know how to see it." I looked at the Torres Foundation sign, illuminated by the setting sun, and thought about all the young people who would walk through these doors in the years to come. Kids who felt called to serve but weren't supported by the people who should have believed in them most. "Maria," I said, "sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong. Sometimes it's creating a world where the next person doesn't have to prove anything at all." In the distance, a flag snapped in the evening breeze. Not just a symbol of the country I'd served, but a promise to every young person that their desire to serve that country was worthy of respect, understanding, and support. I didn't need my family's applause anymore. I had something better, the knowledge that no other young person would have to earn their family's pride the way I had. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.